Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, John Schilberg is here. He's going to help us get through the emotional and mental difficulties in adopting new technologies with some great stories to boot. Today on TWiRT, This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by BSW Broadcast Supply Worldwide with big discounts and easy overnight shipping. And right now, it's Happy New Gear at bswusa.com. By the new Ruby console from Lavo with AutoMix Smart Mixing. See Lavo in your future at lavo.com/TWiRT. And by Direct Current Broadcast e-newsletter. Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday with technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the weekly show where we talk about all things about radio broadcasting, audio technology, RF, and more digital. And we have got a humdinger of a show for you today. Yeah, we talk about everything from the microphone, there it is, the microphone, to the light bulb at the top of the tower. I've been promising for 3 years that I'd have my light bulb back here. I do have a beacon, and someday, I'll have light bulbs put in it that are reasonable, that don't, make the whole room look like a Men in Black episode where we forget everything. So that'll be coming up. I promise someday I'll get to it. The beacon is actually in my way in the garage, in the basement. I keep tripping over it, so I've got to get it taken care of sometime. All right, I'm Kirk Harnack, the host of the show, and delighted that you're here watching. My co-host is here as well, Chris Tobin from the New York City area. Today, probably ensconced somewhere in Newark. Hey, Chris, welcome in.
Thank you. Yes, I'm ensconced in Newark. We just finished a recording this morning, or this midday, of a group of musicians, jazz musicians, the Baylors, Gene and Marcus Baylor, the Baylor Projects. I mention this because they do a lot of great stuff, and they happen to be 2 Grammy Award nominees for this coming Sunday at the Grammys.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, they do. Marcus used to tour with the Yellow Jackets, and the saxophone player, piano player, everybody's been with a lot of large groups, and they're all award-winning folks. The albums they have, it's pretty wild. So they were in the area. They came by and met with our morning show host, and we did a recording video, the whole bit, and it was fun.
Chris, speaking of Grammys, this is something that we should have as a topic on the show, because I know so little about the whole Grammy process. And I know that there are several Grammy museums around. One of them is in the little town in Mississippi where I have a radio station. Cleveland, Mississippi has a Grammy museum there. And I did some drone flying around it at night. It looks really cool. I think they may have pulled down the video because I probably used some copyrighted music on it. But it was anyway. We'll talk about this either during or after the show, or maybe our guest maybe might happen to know something about it too. Love to find an audio engineer or audio expert from the Grammy organization, and that would be cool to have as a guest. Speaking of our guest, let's bring him in. It's John Schilberg. John, welcome in. And I think I was going to say you're in Houston, Texas. Are you in Houston, John?
No, I'm in the Dallas area, just in Allen, Texas, on the far northeast side, at about 1 o'clock, 28 miles from downtown Dallas proper.
Gotcha. Oh, man. I lived in Dallas for a few years in the mid-'90s, and everywhere I wanted to go was an hour away. Doesn't matter what it was. It was an hour away.
That's probably true.
It just seemed like it. I kept picking out stuff.
Worse now, yeah.
I
went to an SBE meeting a couple of years ago, and by the time I got back, I put 200 miles on my car. It was just like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I've spoken at SBE.
But it was worth the meeting. It was well worth it.
Do they still meet at a restaurant somewhere halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, over by the stadiums. By the ballpark and by the football stadium, AT&T.
John, you don't know anything about the Grammy organization, do you?
Well, actually, the one in Mississippi has to do with grandmothers. It doesn't have anything to do with audio or music, so you might want to call them ahead just to double check that.
All right, Chris, what time did we lose control of the show?
Famous Grammys.
Gosh, okay.
Well, we do have
a
Grammy museum.
Sorry, I had
here in New Jersey.
It was teed up too well by you there. Sorry.
So, Chris, you have a Grammy museum in New Jersey as well?
Yes, it's right here in Newark at the Prudential Center. Yes.
Holy cow! Well, see, I thought
it just opened up
special.
I think October of last year. Well, yeah, I think it just
Not too different from Mississippi. I think Mississippi may have opened a year earlier, but okay. So they're putting them everywhere. Hey, so coming up on the show today, episode 379, John Schilberg is joining us, and John, like many engineers, has a storied. Is that a good word? A storied history. And the thing that the thing I always get when I talk to John is he's been around for the introduction of so many different technologies. And so that's what we're going to end up focusing on after our first commercial happens here. So many technologies, and John's going to kind of talk us through what it was like to be there at the introduction of, for example, stereo television, and when Star Trek episodes had to air in Houston, Texas in stereo, and it had to be right. And when it wasn't right, all hell broke loose. And then we're going to relate all that experience with new technologies and their introduction and the pitfalls and pratfalls and difficulties and elation that comes when it works right, and relate that to today's introduction of new technologies. And Chris and John will I'm sure opine on that just a bit. So that's what's coming up on today's show. I'm adopting new tech might be the best name for that. And Chris Tobin has been at the forefront of some new technologies as well. I think Chris invented a few new things.
Absolutely.
So that's what's coming up. Our show is brought to you in part by our friends at Lawo, LAWO.com. And they are involved in, lots of new consoles and virtual technology. And Chris Tobin is going to tell us about Lawo and what they're doing there with some virtual tech. Chris?
Absolutely. Well, the products that we're going to talk about today's virtual radio mixing console. You said to yourself, what's a virtual radio mixing console? Well, it's virtual. It's software related. It's something very simple, something that's so versatile. It's great to have. And it's called the Crystal Clear. And it's a mixing console for radio. It's the entire control surface is software. It's driven by a multi-touch interface. Well, a point of sale. I'll call it a point of sale screen. What is that? Oh, that's right. That's the touch screen you use when you're at the restaurant making your orders. Now think of that. Think of the environment. Give it a moment. Wait. That's right. Multiple users, crazy environment, just like your broadcast studio. So the touch interface is really robust. High resolution computer display without the limitations of physical knobs that get broken sometimes, or headphones get dropped on or copy, buttons and faders. Crystal Clear presents the user, the only relevant controls and information required. Why? It's software driven. So you choose what is seen, just like you do on your computer now in the office, or maybe for your traffic manager. Doesn't need to see everything, but just the key components for traffic management, for spot loading and whatnot. So hiding anything else that's not needed for the task at hand. Very important to understand. You may ask yourself, why do I care? You care a lot because you don't want that phone call at 2 a.m. because the announcer, presenter, or DJ did something they shouldn't because they had access to a piece of the console that wasn't necessary for the task at hand. Crystal Clear is fast, intuitive, and easy. Operators will feel right at home right away if you've set it up the way it should be. And why not? It's software driven. It's easy to drive as a tablet computer, or as easy as a tablet computer, or we'll stick to tablet. Never mind. I'm not going to say brand names. While powerful enough to manage any complex workflow you come up with in this fast-paced broadcast environment we're in. And yes, it is getting faster and faster. Just take your phone out of your pocket, and right away you've already got a studio in your hand. So they think of these things. It's very fast workflow, complex management of everything you do in the studio, whether it's the on-air studio, production studio, maybe it's off-site. Now I say off-site because I spoke to Catfish, but was it a year ago on this very show, and we were talking about how to use this virtual radio concept, this virtual mixing console concept. And I said, what if I do a summer broadcast from Beach House every weekend, the radio station, or maybe for the entire summer, starting from Memorial Day until Labor Day here in the States. And in other parts of the world, maybe you have your own summer holiday schedules. And I decide I want to broadcast from there, but not bring everything down from the studios and create havoc for my engineering staff and programming and everything else. What if all the presenter does at the Beach House is control everything on a touchscreen and the heavy lifting is done back at the studio? He says, sure, easy. How do you do it? Well, your DSL, T1 broadband connections, whatever you want. It's IP, it's virtual, it's software. All of a sudden now you're taking the show on the road in a very easy manner. I just received an email today from a morning show host who asked me, showed me a picture of a tablet and faders on it. I think there was 6 faders on the tablet on location. And he wrote me, whatever happened to the copper wires for the remotes, the phone lines? I said, well, welcome to the new world. It's more reliable, more robust, and more creative. And that's what the Crystal Clear virtual radio mixing console can do for you. And it's simple. It's so easy. You could be a novice. You could be a long-time broadcaster. Everything is going great. Crystal Clear is faster, easy to use. Traditional consoles, physical knobs are out of the way. Touching a timer will cause it. You can change the size of the timer in case you're doing a countdown. Or maybe you want to have special mix minus features. They're available by a touch of the screen. Everything else. And if you start to getting crazy or something, static electricity, there's a panic button. It gets everything back to where the original current setup should be, or what they now call scenes. So you're setting up a scene, you get back to where you should be. So this way you're not losing sight of anything that's going on for the broadcast. Everything comes together. Though simple for operators, Crystal Clear has all the functions needed to create a complex live and recorded radio programming. So live radio studio, down the hall is our recordings performance space. Guess what? Works just the same. Change the scene for recording the band you have in there. 5-piece, 3-piece, or 32-piece orchestra, whatever you choose. Crystal clear, virtual concept, everything there. Everything, the heavy lifting is done back in the rack room, wherever you choose. It's a very simple system. Microphone sources, for example, will automatically mute the monitor speakers when engaged. Common sense, but you know what? How many of us have those production consoles from other manufacturers that don't have muting at all, but we use them a lot? Those little multi-production studio stuff. This one here, again, it's very straightforward. Clean slate glass. You change things, you select what you want, and muting is done for that purpose. Back feeds or mix minus are available on the touch. And it's intelligent, so it knows you select a codec source, it knows a return for IFB is required, or any source that requires, I should say, it's the best way to put it. Is it a 4-wire source? Remember those days? 4-wire, 2-wire? 4-wire source is something going out and something coming back simultaneously. So we want to have that going back out to the field, the capability of mix minus. But everybody has a different name for it. All again, done in the heavy lifting of the 1RU or 2RU chassis that controls all the electronics, all the brains, as meanwhile your touchscreen sits in the studio, very clean. And guess what? Your studio now can become a social area. You can now have a control room that feels comfortable to those guests that come in, because all you do is touchscreens. You don't have all these crazy consoles and faders everywhere else. The touchscreen doesn't have to be vertical. It could be horizontal or at a tilt. So my sight line to my guests feel comfortable. It's as if we're sitting in our, in a living room or a very comfortable conference area or a sofa in a club. Think about that. Yes, that's right. I just changed the dynamic, just changed the paradigm. No longer the crazy arms all over the place. Now we have a very comfortable approach to producing a broadcast. And all you need to understand is the crystal clear console gives you the starting point. And after that, it's just your imagination. So just keep these things in mind when you're trying to figure out, where do I go first? Touchscreen, no screen, virtual, not virtual. You need to understand more about what we're trying to create. And it's a show. You're telling a story, whether it's with music or spoken word. It all happens at the touch of a few buttons for more control. Software control is much more flexible than the hardware buttons and knobs we're all traditional and familiar with, right? For example, assigning a DJ microphone to a fader on a crystal clear console changes the button above the fader from cue to mute. Real simple. You see it visually, boom, done. Maybe giving a DJ a convenient cough button is much easier now than having to get underneath the console, cut a hole in the desk, and say, okay, press this button. Here you go. That's your cough button. No. It's in the software. Real simple. It's on the screen. It's graphic. You can make it very clear for them to use. Crystal clear. Remember that word. Clear. Clear understanding, clear visually. There's a few things that you're not realizing until you start looking at the information about the crystal clear radio mixer, the virtual mixer. Very important to understand. And those of us behind the scenes, engineers, will be very happy. Faders never get dirty or fail. Buttons never break or need lamps replaced. Even a novice can learn the system in minutes without training or making frantic calls during the overnight, as I mentioned earlier. And check this out. What if, just a wild, crazy thought, you bought 2 touch screens and you kept one on the shelf in case of an emergency? What's that emergency? You're right. Your crazy DJ had some friends in. They had a great time. They had all these interviews, and somebody dropped something and cracked the LCD. Yes, that can happen. How easy would it be just to go to the closet, you pull out another monitor, you plug it in, slap it back into the place on the furniture, and you're good. Oh, did I mention if you break the monitor, but you're in the middle of a song, the song keeps playing. Unlike our traditional consoles we're familiar with, when, as the proverbial, if I drop soda into the fader, will the music stop, or does it crash the console or short circuit the power supply? Hard to say. Crystal clear virtual radio mixer, doesn't matter. It's just a screen. It's a control surface. So what? You crack the screen, move on. Pull it out, pop a new one in. I know it sounds crazy, and you're probably trying to get your head around it, but I think it's the best thing you could ask for. So you buy 2, $300 touchscreens, whatever they are, keep them on the shelf. You may think it's crazy, but think about it. I don't like those calls at 2 a.m. They're very annoying. So like all Crystal consoles, Crystal Clear offers you integrated audio mix, audio gain, all the usual features. I know everyone wants to hear about features. Auto mix function, adjust the level of active and inactive microphones. It's very important to understand that. Multiple microphones open in the studio create comb effect. Oh, we won't get into that today, but you'll know what that means when you hear it. It sounds hollow, boxy. Don't want that. Crystal Clear helps you control that, giving a constant ambient that always allows an interview to be conducted without technical operation. The technical operation part is trying to get in there. Yes.
I'm gonna jump in.
Come on, jump in. I'm just trying to get through all the points here. Sorry.
Lavo's gonna have you do every ad for him. That's so far it's been a 7-minute ad.
Sorry, I lost track of time. My timer stopped. I had a little timer on the screen. See, to my point, you gotta have something robust. Okay, guys. Anyway, there you have it. I was expecting somebody to pop in, but that's it. That's all I can tell you for now. So if you like Lavo or interested, give them a call. They have some people here in the States that'll talk to you.
We're proud to have them sponsor This Week in Radio Tech. Thanks, Lavo. No, Chris, you're awesome. You're just awesome. Hey, John Schilberg is our guest. John, let's John, let's real quick. You've been in both radio and television, and I believe one of your early stations you worked at was a big famous one. What, WTMJ in Milwaukee, right?
That's correct. But I'd be remiss if I didn't start out by saying thank you, first of all, to all of the radio people that are on this great broadcast that we're doing here today. Because if it wasn't for radio, I certainly would not have been in television, because I was bitten by the transmission bug early in life. I used to go to sleep at night with a little Iowa or Iowa AM radio. Yeah, a little Iowa rolled inside my pillowcase as I listened to WOKY in Milwaukee. And the show was Walkie Talkie, if you can imagine that. It was a great adaptation of the phrase. So I was bitten by that bug early, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was going to get out of high school. And I was blessed that our speech teacher said we're going to go take a tour of a TV station. And so we went on that tour. We went on that tour to WISN in Milwaukee, Channel 12.
Yeah.
And when I walked into the studio, into the videotape room, I was smitten immediately. And within 30 seconds of seeing all the lights, dials, knobs, buttons, switches, and these guys standing there wearing these Bakelite headsets that are plugged into these quad videotape machines, I knew right then and there I had to figure out how all of it worked.
Do you remember?
Really bit me.
Do you remember the smell of quad videotape? To me, it always had the backing or the tape oxide or something. You could always smell videotape.
Do you remember that? There are a bunch of unique things to do with quad tape, and I got there. I got in right at the end of quad and at the beginning of 1 inch, the quad had its own wonderful sets of personalities. Depending on who the manufacturer was, you were either on your knees praying or on your knees tweaking, and but you could get them to go, and they always worked. So,
it seems like those
but it was exciting times, and again, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the people that blaze the trail in radio. So to all of you that are out there in radio, I really appreciate all of the work that you've done, and I know some fabulous radio people down in Houston. George Shank is one of them, just a tremendous, very dedicated radio broadcaster, terrific guy too. And so, again, thank you to all those fine trailblazers for me.
You alluded to having to adjust the technology of quad tape machines. And in radio, well, I guess we have some equivalents, but quad tape machines often had card cages down near the bottom. And that's where all the little tweaky adjustments were for all kinds of different, chroma and phase and just all kinds of things down there. And sometimes you had to get down, sit down or lay down on your tummy to adjust these things. Chris, Tobin, in your experience and you got some vast experience, you ever had to get down on your butt to adjust things?
Are you kidding me? I've actually, a few video projects I've worked on early in my career, we had 1 inch black and white VR 5100 Ampexes I used to work on. And there were times it was mounted in ways that you were like, okay, how do I get to this? Oh, underneath, huh? All right, I get that. But yes, working on your stomach, on your back, on your side, squatting down, that is par for the course of broadcast engineer, whether it's radio or television.
So if we can start out with a kind of a baseline for John here, because I want to move into these technologies that John saw come along, and then relate that to how we deal with new tech today. Because new tech makes us uncomfortable. We make mistakes with it, or we don't want to implement it. We sometimes don't see the reason for it. John, you mentioned Christmas trees and resistors. Oh, I can just imagine how horrible that was. Is that where you got started with Christmas tree wiring?
That was at a station. I became chief engineer of KFDA TV in Amarillo, and they had a tremendous history of just fabulous chief engineers there preceding me. So I had some really big shoes to fill. But what they had to contend with was either an absence of the technology, and therefore some in-house alchemy and creativity. Or they just didn't have budget to go ahead and buy what they needed. And so instead of having a rack full of audio DAs, they had a couple of Christmas trees that were loaded up pretty good with resistors and some pretty hot feeds coming into them that acted as their distribution amplifiers. And I remember standing there with some of the people that were part of that station at the time, and they said, "Look at this junk that these guys put in there. It's ridiculous." I said, "Wait a minute. You have no idea the amount of creativity and resolve and engineering and patience and ingenuity went into creating the ability to go ahead and have a distribution amplifier without the word amplifier. It was just a distributive network." And so, yeah, some of that stuff was legacy that was either soon to be disconnected or already had been. But one of the things that always has rung true for me that I've seen in the adaptation of new technologies is, and people shouldn't be surprised at this, because it's kind of like what we've experienced with operating system upgrades, either Mac or PC, and that is that what we start off with are islands. No matter what the case, we always start off with islands. Not every videotape machine or in a TV station at various eras has gone and converted completely over to 1-inch tape. Not every TV station went from, in the old 50s and film days, they didn't all automatically or just magically convert over to quad tape. So all of these transitions that we see are incremental and are done in a very logical manner by virtue of creating these little islands that are then interconnected to one another, that then, essentially later become the whole continent of the facility that you have and how it's laid out. So, when we look at ATSC 3.0, or when we look at the transition to Betacam, or listen, the SMPTE 2110 just was released not long ago. And so people are talking about IP transitions now, where they're normally right now either HDSDI or 3G or whatever. But there's a lot of people wringing their hands over, how are we going to do this? What's this going to? It's not a forklift. It's just an incremental change, and you approach it kind of like you eat an elephant, one spoon at a time.
So let's talk about one incremental change that was pretty significant in the late 80s. And I remember this, and I guess a lot of folks do remember when stereo TV started showing up on the shelves. And that was kind of, and remember when NBC and maybe others would, at the beginning of a show, they would run this lower third that kind of went out in stereo like this. And you were part of this. Where available. Yes. In stereo, where available. Yes. You were KHTV in Houston.
Yeah.
So
you had station in Houston.
Yeah. And there was a TV show that was very popular in Houston in particular because of a big industry that's there. And you had to implement stereo. Give us that story about how that worked out and why you jumped in.
Well, this was of course on the coattails of one of the big, huge success stories of BTSC stereo, and that was Miami Vice. It's rumored, or the legend says that I think it was Brandon Tartikoff said, "Give me MTV with cops." And they came up with Miami Vice, and Miami Vice had a really tremendous soundtrack, and they I mean, they went to great production lengths to make this a very exciting show, and that included the audio for one of the first times in the history of television, actually, because with stereo audio coming to television, it basically took the 2.5 to 4 inch, maybe 6 inch oval speaker that you had in your TV sets for, at that time, previously all your life, and all of a sudden it was external speakers and amplifiers, and maybe it wasn't surround yet, but there was just a good thumpy bass. Maybe you had a subwoofer. So our effort at Channel 39 was on the coattails of what NBC and others had already done. So we happened to be at the time the Star Trek station. Star Trek was our huge draw, and the Trekkies, as they're affectionately referred to, we didn't have email back then and that kind of thing, and so we would get calls after the weekend from Trekkies that said, "Hey, when are you going to run that show again?" Or I wasn't able to go ahead and record it. Are you going to have it on again? And so there was all kinds of dialogue back and forth that peaked after the weekend with these Trekkies. And so lo and behold, when Star Trek Next Gen came out, we also aired that show, and it was available in stereo. Well, we made the transition over to stereo, and it was a little bit of an involved process. We had to install some monitoring gear, some generators, obviously, and make a couple of modifications to our transmitter exciters. And so we were really, kind of jazzed up about it, and knowing that Miami Vice had such a good following with their soundtracks that Star Trek would really benefit from this too. So lo and behold, we make this transition and that kind of thing. Well, one of the episodes goes by, and all of a sudden I get a call on Monday, and it's from a Trekkie, and he's like, "Man, that audio was just fabulous, but something's wrong. It just didn't sound right. It was like the people were talking. It was funny. It was just weird. What was going on?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I'll go back and listen to the show." And I did, and I went back and put the 1-inch videotape up and listened to the show, and it sounded okay. So I thought, well, maybe something along the process. And the next weekend goes by, and Monday, phone lights up. "Hey, that show again, I heard that." And I was like, okay, fine. So I decided, because of the way the stereo chain was set up for broadcast, I couldn't take it out of line and then put that show through it to do a test. It was the only one of its kind, and we had to have it on the air. So I had to show up and be in the studio, or be in the rack room during the airing of that show. And what the symptom was there would be, if you recall, or if you know anything about the show, you know that there's a lot of interesting dialogue that takes place on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And it's all these serious sort of pondering looks that people make at the big screens when the Klingons are out there and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's like, but what should we do? What should we do? How are we going to go ahead and get out of this jam? And there would be pauses in their dialogue. And while there were pauses, all of a sudden you'd hear this wah, 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 wah. And you hear the droning of the Enterprise's powerful engines in the background. And then they would start to talk again. And it was as though everybody talked from a whisper to a regular tone. And they would always ramp up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can hear that. I know what he's talking about. And I actually heard it. And so I did some more investigation, and as the show went on, I was looking at our phase scope, and in television, broadcast television sound at the time, stereo sound, it was L plus R and L minus R, and if you had the wrong mix of left and right, or you were phase inverted, you would literally cancel out the mono portion of the program.
Sure.
So there was a great deal of effort made with phasing of the audio signals. And as a result, we had this thing called a chaser, a phase chaser. And when the phase chaser would sense that there was something coming in that was, in an audio sense, out of phase, it would go ahead and try to reverse it so that it would be in the proper phase and therefore maintain your audio continuity. Well, as these people would stop talking on the bridge and the engine noise would come up, you'd listen to it. It was like you'd see the little meter indicator on the phase scope. You could see it slowly kind of rotate and try to catch it and bring it back. And it was the sound effect from the engines that was actually out of phase. And as soon as people started talking, because they were also phase flipped now, they were out of phase and their audio was canceled out. They would start from this low sort of almost seemingly whisper, and their audio would grow and it happened quickly, but audio has unique characteristics that people catch anomalies in it very readily because it's something that we're very accustomed to, and so it just sounded weird. And so I did some research and I called the distributor and said, "Hey, this show was fed to us. Did you do anything with the audio on the way over here?" And that guy, "No, we haven't touched anything." I said, "Well, this sound effect is out of phase on this." "Well, all we do is put up the tape and air it via satellite or send it out via satellite to people like you that are recording it for playback later. We don't touch it. You need to talk to the producers." And I said, "Okay." So I called the folks who were doing the Star Trek show. And I ended up talking to one of the audio guys there. And I said, "Hey, we're having kind of an interesting effect here. And I've looked at it on the scope, and it looks like the engine noise is coming in out of phase, and my phase chaser is chasing it to try to bring it into phase. And then when people talk, you don't hear them." And I on the other end of the phone, all I heard was silence. And I thought, "Oh no, he's already hung up on me." He doesn't. And he said, and suddenly I heard this kind of rustling, like I'm doing on the, and like he was cupping his hand to his handheld receiver on his phone, and he just said, "You have no idea what it's like working here." And I said, "Well, what?" I was like, "Wait a minute, I'm not HR. You didn't dial me. What are you talking about?" He said, one of the producers of the show loved the way the engine noise sounded, as it was so raspy and nasty in the control room, that he explained to him, but it's out of phase. I love that. And he got kind of what I would just call a flanging effect, because these things were out of phase. And he said, I can't convince him to not change it. I said, "Okay, that's all I need to know. It's not us." So here, this little effect that all these Trekkie fans in Houston were suffering through was as a result of some producer who just loved that nasty sound effect back in a control room in Los Angeles. So my goodness, that was a lot of fun. A lot of fun chasing that one down. So,
do they still have a Howe audio phase chaser or some kind of phase detector flipper in audio circuits today? God, I hope not.
Well, it's all done differently under the new high def transmission system. It's a completely different system altogether. So, phase is still important, but you're pumping 5.1 or secondary audio program plus, and now there's descriptive audio, which was another interesting story. But or descriptive video that has an audio channel to go with it. So it's a whole different method that and workflow to it. But phase still is important, and you can bet you that there's the vidiots like me and the audiophiles that are out there that are watching and listening are going to go, "Hey, let's call the station, or let's send them an email." So
the bottom line was it was the dominant, the phase flipping device that was supposed to let you to take errant audio and flip it so it was in phase, so it was good on mono televisions. It sounds like it was reacting to the dominant audio that was the sound effect, and thereby flipping the phase for that. And then people with a mono television couldn't hear the thing that was originally in phase, the dialogue. Because the sound effect had made it be put out of phase. So wow. Hey,
exactly.
Coming up, we got a quick. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we've got a quick commercial break, and coming up, we've got some interesting. I want to hear your thoughts about the SAP, because a lot of us don't know much about the SAP channel, and then also the Pro channel. What's the difference there?
Sure.
Then we want to look into the a little bit of education about the loudness things for television, how you dealt with that in television, and then finally, and then a little subject of audio delays for plasma televisions that they had some syncing errors there. But I really want to get into this thing that you've been more recently interested in and involved with, and that is using multiple channels of mobile telephone communications. That is, to get high quality television. And you and I have talked about the radio stations using this to get good quality radio and now some video back to the station. So, that's coming up. So our guest is John Schilberg. Chris Tobin is with us in New Jersey, and I'm Kirk Harnack. It's episode 379 of This Week in Radio Tech. Our show this week is brought to you by our friends at Broadcast Supply Worldwide. That's bswusa.com. And right now, it's their January clearance sale. You can go to bswusa.com, excuse me, and read all about Happy New Gear. So they're so good at marketing. You can save up to 50% if your New Year's resolution is save big on a wide range of essential gear. And that wasn't really my resolution, but it sounds good. You've come to the right place at Broadcast Supply Worldwide. You can click on their special clearance sale area where you can find lots of certified B-stock stuff to find out about. One item that you may be interested in is from Innovonics. It's the it's the Aaron 650 FM rebroadcast translator receiver. Now, this is so important. So many translators are out there now for FM broadcast. I mean, right here in Nashville, it seems like we've got half a dozen translators that weren't there a few years ago. And, of course, some people feed them over the air. And if you do that, you need this translator receiver, the Aaron 650. It's $691 on a certified, fully warranted B-stock version of this Aaron 650 FM rebroadcast translator receiver. It has great sensitivity and selectivity. It really does handle tough reception scenarios, and it's only $16.99 while supplies last. There's also a mic bundle bargain. You can save 49% on Audio-Technica's BP40 dynamic broadcast mic. It really does deliver rich, natural condenser-like sound, bundled with a companion shock mount, WinTech windscreen, and a custom BSW broadcast mic cable. For a limited time, it's only $359. There's a digital tuner deal, and man, do radio stations need these. You get a $30 instant rebate on the Rolls HR78X. Now, that is a compact, PLL synthesized digital AM FM tuner with a large display, 20 presets. That's 10 AM, 10 FM, auto search, balanced outputs. Whoa, that's nice. Balanced outputs and more. That saves you from having to buy a matchbox or a matching amplifier. Simply enter the promo code TUNER when you check out, and you have in your shopping cart the Rolls HR78X. Now, Rolls is known for real values, and their stuff, we use them at our radio stations. I don't have one of these, though, the HR78X with the balanced output. That is really nice. You can also save on a very precise FM processor. Save 20% on the Omnia 1 FM digital on-air processor. It's 100% time-aligned internally for maximum audio precision. Utilizes powerful processing algorithms to easily handle today's broadcasting demands. Don't delay. It's only $27.99 while supplies last, and that is a heck of a deal on the Omnia 1 FM. And by the way, if you need something besides FM, you can just download the software to make that Omnia 1 FM processor into an AM or studio processor, or ideal for one of your HD signals. So check that out. So it's this big sale at BSW, Broadcast Supply Worldwide. Go to bswusa.com. And by the way, if you're like me and you forget to order until late in the day, but oh no, you need it tomorrow, not a problem, because they have a huge warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. It is just down the street from the Columbus airport. Order by 7 p.m. Eastern time. Get it on the plane tonight, and you'll have it tomorrow if you want to pay for the overnight shipping, or a couple of days, or 3 days. It's up to you, whatever shipping you want to pay for to get stuff to you. But if you're like me, oh my gosh, I need this rack shelf right now. By the way, speaking of rack shelf, I just went to the BSW website. I needed a really deep rack shelf, found exactly what I need with one quick little search. It was right there in the search. Love their website. Thanks to our sponsor, bswusa.com. And we really appreciate them sponsoring the show. All right, we're here with Chris Tobin. Chris is in Newark, New Jersey. Hey, Chris, welcome back. We've been letting John talk a lot. And
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, he's got so many great stories to tell. And John Schilberg is our guest. He's been a radio and television engineer, and he's also worked in the sales arena. So, John, would you somehow the whole technology of SAP and Pro for television, these passed me by. Give me a little bit about what they're about, how they're supposed to be used, how they end up getting used, and what at a TV station did you guys have to do to implement those so they, you got some usefulness out of those channels.
Well, and I was going to add before the break that, in fact, that phase problem that we had with that show was the same problem that actually Miami Vice had in an early episode when there was a gunshot that was not heard on the air on mono TVs, but on stereo TVs it was. And it was because that same thing, a phasing problem, it canceled it out on the mono TVs. So all you saw was this flash from a muzzle of a gun, and it was completely silent. So a lot of people had that problem early on. But when you ask about the SAP and the Pro side of things, the big, huge deal about BTSC was, of course, having a left and right channel, and that was the main thing. But ancillary to that, and slowly people started buying more and more TVs that had SAP secondary audio program and Pro, short for professional, channel. They didn't have a receiver in their consumer TVs, but we had capability through places like I think Eric Small with Modulation Sciences was one of the early providers of gear that did the Pro channel stuff, and you could use a Pro channel. Was an ancillary channel to the BTSC stereo that was on a separate subcarrier that you could use for ENG queuing or IFB feedback, fallback to the talent out in the field doing live shots. So it was kind of a utility channel for a lot of people. But SAP, where available, just like stereo, provided a secondary audio program for alternate languages. In the U.S., the predominant one was Spanish. Sure. So every now and then we would get a call at our stations throughout the history of this, and it's like, "Hey, my TV is only talking Spanish. What's going on?" Well, go get the remote and just go to see a thing. And the fun part about it was, and of course, all of our engineers had to be kind of well versed in doing sort of troubleshooting over the phone with remote controls they had never seen, or maybe had heard about a couple of weeks ago from another guy who called. So that's what the utility was for those. It opened up the Hispanic audience to a great extent with the secondary audio program being Spanish here in the U.S. And via the Pro channel, we could get some utility out of that queuing. But I would also add that the multiple channel audio is still prevalent today in the HD realm, and in fact, CBS and other networks now have been doing what's called descriptive video, and they also put it on the SAP channel. And I did have, when I was working for a group of TV stations up in Oklahoma, I did get a report sheet from the receptionist at from our Tulsa facility that said we had a viewer call, and they said that our TV was talking to them, and it was telling them where people were on TV and what they were getting ready to do, and it was all this kind of, I told him that we weren't doing that, and I let him know that wasn't us. We were just doing the right stuff. All we were doing was regular audio. So I saw that on the report, and I called her up that morning, and I said, "Hey, Court, could you describe that call to me?" And she said, "Yeah, this guy was telling me that there was all this descriptive stuff going on. And the people were describing what was going on in the room, and he couldn't turn it off, and it was bothering him. And no other channels were like that. And what he did was, in fact, he had his SAP channel inadvertently on, and he was listening to the descriptive video channel, which of course is TV for the blind. Now, it's you wonder, well, how could you have TV for the blind? Is that the same as radio for the deaf? But it's different. Apparently, and there's a very vocal handicap community out there that is really a very, very coordinated, avid audience of television, and a force to be reckoned with in terms of making sure your closed captioning is accurate and works and that kind of thing. So it's an accommodation that broadcasters have made by regulation to help this audience become a part of and be able to really fully utilize the broadcast television medium like all of us would like to do. So
yeah, that Pro channel, now I remember that getting used like for talkback, like we sometimes used to use FM subcarriers for talkback to remotes. This was before the days of cell phones, right? So
right.
1989, yep. 1990, this is before cell phones were very popular. And yeah,
yep.
we use that to communicate back to the remote site. Wow. Yep. Okay. That makes sense.
So now, through time from that little 2.5-inch speaker that used to be there to today, audio in television has really taken some remarkable strides in providing higher and higher quality to the end user. And now you walk into homes and you can see the ceilings and walls are peppered with speakers and that kind of thing. So it really has been a remarkable transformation.
So talk to us just for a minute about when the loudness requirements came along. Well, you may not have been a chief engineer at that point. What points do you want to make about television loudness?
Well, loudness is, I don't know any other thing, the way to say it, but loudness is weird because it's a perceived, it's a perception. And you can, what's the process that people some producers go through is called sweetening. And you can punch up certain frequencies, and a lot of your AM guys know exactly what I'm talking about when you're talking about punching up certain frequencies and making it penetrate more or sound more. I mean, your stereo has probably got a loudness control on it and a little push button that says loudness. Well, that's for when you're listening at low audio levels, when you really don't have a lot of power that's going out to the speakers that's attributed to or rather concentrated on the lower frequencies or certain frequencies. And so you push that loudness button and all of a sudden it sounds a little fuller, maybe a little deeper, richer. So loudness is a character, is weird because it's a characteristic of the ear. And how you measure that characteristic of the ear was a really, really tenuous battle for years between scientists and audiologists and producers and whatnot to come up with that. And Mike Durow, the Durow loudness meter became kind of the de facto standard ultimately in at least television side of things for what is loudness. And later there was actually legislation put forth called the Calm Act, and it was legislated that people would have to go ahead and install at TV stations devices that would maintain audio within certain sort of goalposts and levels, and be able to go ahead and keep large excursions from taking place across the band and having things sound louder, because people would complain that commercial's so loud. Well, the commercial was louder because they sweetened the audio and they punched up certain frequencies, and yeah, it was louder, but the peak VU still wasn't being hit, but it was louder. And you'd show them, look, we're not cranking it up. That's just the way it sounds because of this. And it's like, no, that's not the real meter. And I don't know how many times I gave tours and would have to explain to people that that's what was going on. And that's really in layman's terms, kind of, but that's the gist of it.
Got you. Yeah. So hey, we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I'd like to get your thoughts now on adopting another new technology that so many TV stations have, but I think we're just going to see more and more and more of this. Although, as we move into 5G, and maybe Chris can chime in on what he has seen from the different carriers as to what bit rates are going to be available in coverage areas, and some opinion on that. In fact, let's go ahead and ask Chris right now. Chris, I know you're in touch with people from the different carriers, and you're invited to some industry events. What do you foresee in terms of being out in the field and being able to send a lot of data back to a site like your TV or your radio station in the future? Is 5G going to be a thing that's going to help us?
All 5G is taking on various forms and shapes. A lot of it has to do with the front haul of the bandwidth of the data that's going to the carrier back and forth. They're actually looking at AT&T is doing it, I think, in Houston. Or maybe it's in Dallas. They're working with experimenting with the 5G frequencies and bandwidth and the technology to have these little hotspots that they can point to a building and say, okay, this building's going to get several gigabits back and forth because it's going to connect to their fiber backbone. But the last mile, as you will be this high broadband wireless link. And that's where things are starting to go with the 5G. There's been experiments here in New York State. I think the folks at NYU and New York University's engineering department did experiments last year, 2 years ago. They did a complete paper on the concept of the 5G, the bandwidth, the algorithms they're using, the frequencies over a distance of several miles to demonstrate what you can do. Yes, it's very limited in some cases, but it actually will be sort of, think of it as like a filler, or as what you now know as the outdoor DAS systems, or the distributed antenna systems. If you're in New York City or Philadelphia and you're walking around a lamppost, you see this rectangular box, usually brown or green, and then at the very top of the lamppost it looks like a mast, a little pole. Well, that's a cell site, but it's a fill-in site just to help offload the traffic. So 5G is going in that same direction with a little more intensity because they can do more with the bandwidth they're being given, with the frequency ranges they're working in. So yeah, I could see it happening. Will it be as simple as what we do now with 4G and 4G LTE A and everything else? Probably in a couple of years. But right now, it gives the carriers a choice of where to manage the traffic. And that's the key, is traffic management.
So, John, I guess there are 3, maybe 4 manufacturers who make systems that allow people who need a lot of data out in the field, namely, a TV station, to get an HD signal back from a moving car or from a remote site, maybe someplace where their microwave shot is not going to work from. And so they can use, systems from Live View, Teradek, maybe Dejero is one of them. Maybe you can give us some thoughts on that technology and people adopting it, what problems they had, and then what you think we can expect down the road as those technologies mature even more.
Well, it's a fascinating area of technology. It really is, because, as Chris was saying, it's all about bandwidth, and what the broadcaster has tried to do for many, many, many years from the field, especially in weather-related areas. I can remember some companies experimenting with slow scan TV out in the field just to be able to go ahead and send a picture back, not a moving picture, but a frame back, a video or of a still shot of a tornado. And so this has been going on for years. And then lo and behold, with the predominance and the ubiquity of cell phone sites and cell phone connections, some really sharp guys got together and gals got together and said, let's go ahead and take these 6 or 8 or 4 or however many cell phone modems and cards, data cards, and let's go ahead and bond them together in such a way that they're all contributing to the same effort. In other words, let's put them on in a kind of a gang of 6 or 8, and we'll slice and dice up the video and audio in such a way that each provider's card, and generally you have several different providers in each one of these portable transmitters, but each one of these providers will take a chunk of the bandwidth and get it back over to, ultimately, to the quote-unquote receiver that is actually a server back at the studio location. and be able to magically, through a variety of different algorithms and science and magic, put the eyeballs where the eyeballs should be and the lips where the lips should be, and the audio that matches the lips and the eyes. And so that's what came of bonded cellular. And literally it has been in since probably 2009, 10, right in there, has literally revolutionized news gathering. In that you hardly see anymore a lot of satellite live shots coming from stations, other than where they are convinced in advance that there's going to be extremely limited bandwidth available. So let's bring the truck. And it has made a severe dent in the number of live trucks with 2 gig, 7 gig extendable masts and all of that racked up gear inside. It has kind of put the kibosh on how many of those a station needs, when all you need is something that's probably this big, and you can go ahead and do a HD live shot with it, and just by virtue of connecting up to cell phone. So that device now takes you not just within your DMA as a station, but allows you to go ahead and cover your local sports team at a remote location without having to call a satellite truck. And the backup to that is typically either a good solid Wi-Fi connection or a wired connection via Ethernet to get back. So that's changed radically. And one of the things that's really taken place as far as that type of technology is, people talk about 5G a lot, and it's a hot topic, but there's a lot of stuff that's got to happen to 5G yet before it really proliferates. And not the least of which is getting the signals back into the via backhaul into the system. There's a lot of glass that's got to be laid down yet, and there are considerations with propagation at 5G frequencies and that kind of thing that have to be contended with as well. But when you start looking at when it is available, and it won't be that long, but it will be a while. But when that becomes available, now you'll have a lot of bandwidth from a single carrier, and hopefully it will be robust enough so that you won't need multiple cards in your bonded device. Maybe you'll just need 2, maybe 3 instead of 6 or 8. Yeah. But it'll cut down the cost of that. So that's another thing that's coming up in the not too distant future and that kind of thing. So a lot of exciting stuff happening with that.
John, in just a minute, we've got a break. And after that, we're going to get a tip from you. I think you promised a tip for our listeners. But before we go to break, I wonder if you might pontificate for just as long as an elevator ride. I know that's tough. Pontificate a bit about the topic of today's show, and that is accepting or adopting new technology. You've seen the adoption of a number of different technologies, and you're a lighthearted guy. You're an optimistic guy. What is your advice to today's engineers who may be overwhelmed? You got too much to do, and that here comes another new technology, maybe IP video, maybe IP audio, whatever that may be, or maybe it's something else. I got the feeling that you might have a light-spirited word of encouragement for engineers who seem inundated with yet another new technology down the pike they got to learn about.
Well, I'm probably going to be chastised by a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to quote one of my favorite professional football players, and that's from my home state of Wisconsin, that being Aaron Rodgers. And I'll complete the thought after the break, but relax. 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 Go ahead. Go to break.
Okay. Episode 379 This Week in Radio Tech. John well, that's a great tease. You've been in TV a long time. Chris Tobin will be back along with John Schilberg with a final tip for you after this word from our sponsor, the Telos Alliance. Roll it.
Not much in the paper today, is there?
Yeah, not much. Seems tough to stay informed, you know?
Like we're missing out on stuff, important stuff.
Yeah, feels like week-old news. Yesterday's stories. Half the tech stuff in here seems out of date by the time I see it.
What Kurt doesn't know is I'm way ahead of everyone else around here. Every Thursday, I get this newsletter in my email. It's Direct Current. The folks at the Telos Alliance publish this.
What Joe doesn't know is I keep one step ahead of the radio guys in this market. Every Thursday, I get Direct Current from the folks at the Telos Alliance. It's a free newsletter about radio engineering, audio, streaming, studios, everything.
Thursday afternoons, we have our department head meeting. I look like a genius, thanks to the knowledge, updates, and advice in Direct Current. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell Kirk about Direct Current. Might help him out.
I wonder if I should let Joe in on my secret. He could use a little help sometimes.
Nah.
Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday. Read profiles of engineers and newsmakers in the broadcast community. Get technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. Important industry news and views. Plus, you'll be up to date on Telos, Omnia, Axia, and Zipstream products. It's all here in the Direct Current newsletter. Subscribe online at telosalliance.com/directcurrent. That's telosalliance.com/directcurrent.
And today's Direct Current came into my inbox with a great story about how Axia and audio over IP is helping Johns Hopkins students to shine at Johns Hopkins University. An interview with production supervisor Dom Delaney is part of this. Also, information about auto EQ and a powerful update to the Omnia SST software, and I was just looking forward to saying butt set. A story about how the Axia X selector is your new network butt set. So there you go. If you were worried about your analog audio going away and your butt set doesn't work anymore, well, it's back. So that's in this week's Direct Current. All right. Well, I think we lost control of the show a long time ago. Let's hear from Chris. Let's keep our powder dry and hear from Chris Tobin first. Chris, have you got a little tip for us this week? You so often do.
Oh yeah. It's revisiting our thing. I'm just going to give an example, but to the point of what John was saying with the 5G, 4G, and all the new bonded cellular stuff, Engenesis has come out with technology over the last several years using LTE. And for those of you in the BAS spectrum for TV, 2 and 7 gig, you can actually build your own LTE network and have control of it rather than rely on the phone company. So if you really want to be on top of things, yes.
Yeah, Chris,
2 years in a row, I've watched it, and I talked to everybody here in the market and said, hey, what if you could use your existing point-to-point microwave and build a network where you can pop on and off and have LTE devices? Everyone's like, well, it's nice, but what's it going to cost? I'm like, well, what's it going to cost when the cell company isn't operating when there's a storm and you're trying to cover some event with your bonded cellular backpack? Oh,
interesting.
And you're in view of your microwave system. I know, working for one major network for the years, I used to piggyback on their backbone for radio events. We used to use their microwave portable transmitter for radio events. Yes, people would look at me, oh, is that a TV transmitter? Yeah. The video goes to our website and the audio goes to the FM station. What's wrong with that? I could go anywhere in New York City and drop this box in a window. If you called me today and said, Mariah Carey wants to do an event with us tomorrow morning in the morning show, but they got to do it at her hotel room, can we do it? I'd look at my map and go, absolutely. What time do you want to be there? And we would do it. And everyone looked at me like, but it's a TV product. Yes, that's the point behind this. So I'm just pointing out John's point about 5G and bandwidth and understanding what's going on. So just had to throw that in there because I've seen this product and technology and continue to be fascinated by the fact that nobody seems to be touching it. But
Chris, send me a link to that and I'll put it in the show notes. Would you give me a link?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll make sure that goes in the show notes. Good deal.
Yeah. All right. So the tip is
the tip. Go ahead.
Once again, labeling. I was at an event this past weekend, big time music event here in the city, and went to a couple of live performances and watching people on stage. And the sound guy front of house is calling down to the tech on the stage, fix this, check that. And the guy's like pulling cables. He's pulling the cable bundle, trying to figure out where the mic connection is that's in trouble. And I'm looking at going, why can't you just put numbers on the end of it? Go to the snake box, number 42, Go to the drum set. Number 42 is the overhead mic. Here we go. Click, click, click. No, time waste. It's just to the point. Then I was on a video shoot recently. Same thing happened again. It's just 3 of us, video shoot with a 5-piece band, and the sound guy's like, I'm having a problem with the microphone on the saxophone. I was like, oh, which cable is it? I don't know. I had to pull every cable because he snaked them around and get them out of the way. No numbers. So once again, I know this is like preaching to the choir for some, but for those of you who are so busy and forget, label it. It's worth it. Even the keyboard on your computer in the production studio should have a number on it. So when it goes underneath the furniture and back to the CPU, you'll know which one you're pulling out and not the wrong one. Because you know what that happens when you pull out the wrong connection on some computers. They go batty, especially if you're running Pro Tools. It doesn't like that. So that's my tip. Just go back to labeling. Make sure you do these things. It's important. Very, very important.
It's going to say, label it on Chris Tobin's tombstone someday.
I'm going to get a T-shirt. I think that's what I'm going to wear, a T-shirt at NAB. Label it.
We should do a TWiRT T-shirt that says label it. Chris says label it. We got to do that.
I'm serious. Right. I've done, we did a production today, right? I said we recorded a nice 5-piece group. Guess what? We had one of the microphones hitting trouble. All I had to hear was which microphone? It was piano on the mic of the piano. Went to it, number 47. Went back to the patch panel on the wall, number 47. Unplugged both. Popped in. In less than 1 minute, I replaced the cable. We got back to recording. 1 minute. Just saying.
All because I label it. All right.
Just make sure you spell label right.
That's right.
No, you got to incorrectly spell it. See if they're paying attention, like a writer when you're a musician.
All right, we're running out of time. John Schilberg, finish your thought.
Okay, so I was just about a year and a half into my career, and they said, okay, John, you're going to install a transmitter. And I thought, oh, wow, cool. That's going to be really neat. And about 6 weeks before the transmitter arrived, I was walking around my transmitter site and transmitter building, and I thought, holy crap, I'm going to install a transmitter. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I've never installed a transmitter. I've only been in this business for a year and a half. And I started to literally pace the building, and it was just me in there alone. But I started to pace and started to get really nervous and all that kind of stuff about what am I going to do, until I sat back and I tried to distill what it was I was going to do. So when you are faced with these kinds of seemingly daunting tasks and that kind of thing, instead of going to the distillery and having a drink about it, go and try to distill down and boil down what it is you're going to do. And what I resolved from my introspection about the project was that all throughout high school, people asked me, can you put my tape deck in my car? I need to install my tape deck. Can you put my radio in? And they tell me it can't be done in this car. Well, that was all you had to tell me, and I would install the radio in your car. And so I knew that I could install things. So all I did was I translated what would be the television transmitter to a tape deck inside of a dash, and the dash became that building, and the tower became where the speaker wire was going to climb up, and the antenna became the speakers, and I just distilled it all down, and I got it down into its fundamentals, and I was able to sit down with a scale drawing, and I used pipe cleaners, and I cut the pipe cleaners in certain lengths to go ahead and lay out the transmission line runs, and it all worked out really well in the end. So when you're faced with these kinds of things, my definition has always been that worry is concern without a plan. And I've spoken about this at career days and that kind of thing, and that's the advice I give people. If you start to plan and you start to go ahead and think about these things and you start to plan, your worry about them will disappear automatically. It can't coexist with a plan. So worry is concern without a plan. Start planning and quit worrying.
Love it. I wish that might be our show title. Worry is concern without a plan. I love it.
Well, there you go.
At least it'll be our subtitle.
Yeah.
All right. We got to go. John Schilberg, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. I enjoy it very, very much, and glad to have you on the show. Chris Tobin, glad you're here. Hey, did you guys have a big snowstorm up there, or was it just cold or what?
It's cold. There was not much of a big storm in the New York City area. Upstate New York did have several inches, and I think near Rochester they got slammed. But no, here in New York, we some areas had 1 or 2 inches. The others was just a dusting, so it wasn't nothing crippling. Put it that way.
Gotcha. Well, late last week, I had a flight canceled late last week after we did last week's show, and ended up renting a car and driving for 9 hours, which should have been an hour and a half flight. So ended up finally making it home, and ice free all the way home till I got to the house, and it was sheer ice up the hill, which I already knew because I called my neighbor and said, "Is there ice on the hill?" He said, "Oh yeah." So I stopped, got some ice melt at a gas station, got home. 2:00 in the morning, I'm out there sprinkling ice melt on the 400 feet up the driveway.
Oh man.
Yeah. It was exciting, and then we had the family reunion with the Harnack family. So. Oh, well,
nice.
it all worked out. I just wonder what you guys got. We got there was a lot of snow north of here. So. Okay. Hey, next week, our guest is Jim Leifer, the new president of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. Jim's going to be with us and tell us about. I corralled Jim into being our guest.
Nice.
So,
that's great.
So maybe he'll be on from Boston. That's his new home. Can you imagine moving from what Fort Lauderdale or West Palm, wherever he lived before, to Boston?
Yikes.
Yeah, big change.
That's going the wrong direction at zip code numbers.
I know. All right, we got to go. Thanks a lot to Suncast for being the producer of today's show. He always does a great job, and I really appreciate him very much. Also to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. Thanks a lot. We'll be back next week, and tell your friends about This Week in Radio Tech. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye-bye.